Shalom to everybody. This week's portion, the parsha, is called Pikudei. Very often it's connected with the previous parsha, Vayakel Pikudei. But this year, it's a leap year, and the portions are separated. So this coming Shabbat, we're going to just read the parsha Pikudei, which simply, the word Pikudei literally means that these are the countings or the values, the sum of the Mishkan. I mean, these two parashot are discussing the building of the tabernacle in the desert. And the building of the tabernacle, which is, again, a monumental feat, so it involves the collecting of a lot of gold, materials, silver, all sorts of crafts need to be made. And the sum of it all is described in great detail in the Torah. And the verse that opens this parasha, Ele Pekudei HaMishkan, Mishkan HaEdut, Asher Pukad Al Yedei Moshe. These are the countings, or the summary, the sums of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, that were counted and summed together by Moshe Rabbeinu. Now this word that is the title of this parasha, of this week's portion, Pikudei, which, as we said, literally means to account for something. But it also means the exact opposite in Hebrew. When you say this word Pikudei, then it can either mean that someone is missing, or that someone is accountable for. So the same word, precisely same word, and we'll try to contemplate on why that's the fact. Because again, like every word in Lashon HaKodesh, in Hebrew, so the word it depicts what its content is. So if it's depicting a contradictory, paradoxical meaning, like here, the word Pikudei means two contradictory things, and we have to see how these two contradictory concepts actually are intertwined. So the phrase Pikudei can either mean that you're nifkad, which means that you're absent, you're not here, you're unaccountable for, or it could mean that you're accountable, that we can see you and count you and sum you up. Now the phrase, as the Ishbitzer in this portion quotes, in order to interpret it, he quotes it that it appears in the context of David Melech Israel. So the most famous appearance of this is when David HaMelech is absent from his father-in-law's table. He befriends Yonatan, the son of Shaul, the King Saul, who is again his king, King David's king. But as we know the story, those of us who are familiar with it, and whoever isn't should catch up quickly. So King Shaul, he's trepidatious of David because he realizes that there's growing a new power here, a new charming, charismatic character that again contains some of the traits that he himself doesn't contain, and all through his life, to the point of insanity in his older age, that he mamash becomes paranoid and even loses some of his sanity, evolved around his obsession with King David, this young boy who's growing up. In the earlier stages, so his friendship, King David's friendship with his son, Yonatan, is something that bothers him very much. And there's a scene where they're sitting in the monthly meal. This is a portion in the Torah, in the Navi, in the prophet that we read on Rosh Chodesh, or Erev Rosh Chodesh. And the verse says, "V'nifkadeta ki paked Moshe v'achem," that you'll be counted for because you are unaccounted for. Which literally means that because your seat is empty, because you're not there, so we notice you. So again, so that's already a simple phenomena that explains this contradictory meaning of the word. That when something's missing, absent, so the absence is like a vacuum. The vacuum kind of sucks your attention. So like if you're sitting around the table, and there should be a certain amount of people, and there's someone's absent, so his absence calls your attention to him. So his lack of accountability makes him counted. Suddenly you notice him, it makes him noticeable. So there's this contradictory meaning, and this is also the quotation about David HaMelech, that he brings a different quotation, but also about David HaMelech, that he is the one who, in a certain sense, embodies this phenomena, where your absence makes you something counted, something noticeable. Now, the idea he conveys here is that this is the entire concept of the Mishkan. Why does this phrase appear in the title of how we describe the culmination of the building of the Mishkan? So like we said, simply, it's just because Moshe Rabbeinu is being accounted for all of the treasury that he's been given in order to form the tabernacle. But this word, Ele Pekudei HaMishkan, implies that the Mishkan itself, the tabernacle itself, is a living phenomena that manifests this concept. And that's exactly what he wants to describe here. And we all know that the tabernacle, the ideal concept of the tabernacle based on Mikdash, is that we all need to build our entire shlichut, our entire all of the creation, not just every Jew and every person, every creation in the world, every physical entity, every creation that Hashem made, every existence, kol davar, and the word for a thing in Hebrew is a word. That's the word for a thing. It's a speech. Hashem is speaking the world. He brings reality into existence with his speech, and every single thing is an expression of Hashem. Just like when I'm speaking right now, I have an idea to convey, and in order to express it, so I use my words, and every word I say is expressing myself in a certain way. So also all of reality, by essence, is an expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's an expression of God. Now, every single one of these things around us, which the word for a thing, davar, literally means a word or a saying. Again, a saying by Hashem. Every artifact I pick up, every stone in the street, is Hashem saying something. Now, it's not always apparent. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's having trouble phrasing himself or expressing himself, or at the very least drawing our attention to him. And the essence of every creation, the rectification of every creation, this is all the more so about our personal identity, because human awareness, my awareness of self, is the most protruding existence in reality. And as long as every detail protrudes itself, so it conceals, instead of expressing and revealing Hashem's presence, it conceals on it. So, for instance, if I'm trying to express myself in words, so if my language or the sound of my voice, let's say I have a very squeaky voice or a very hoarse voice, or if the tones or the details of how I speak, if they're too prominent and they take too much attention, they draw the attention away from my expression of self. So you could sit in this class and you don't listen, you don't hear me, you don't even notice I'm talking, you just get caught up with the details. So that's like an example of how we're experiencing reality. That Kosh Baruch Hu is expressing himself. But instead of putting the words together and hearing the content and seeing how reality expresses Hashem, all the individual details are protruding themselves. They're overly expressing themselves, and therefore they're not reflecting HaKadosh Baruch Hu into the world. So instead of Hashem's expression of self expressing him, it's concealing him. So that would be like me giving over a class and not being able to convey my idea, what I want to say. So I'm teaching, but I'm not managing to say myself, to speak myself into the words. So there could be obviously two sides to this problem. It could be that I'm not managing to express myself. It could also very well be that the other side is not listening so well, or somewhere in the middle. So as an allegory, it's the same thing with all of creation. Now, what comes of all this? That the concealment of Hashem, that all of reality doesn't express Hashem, is intertwined with the fact that every detail is, like if we say it in a psychological phrase, even the rock is self-involved. So that I see the rock, and instead of expressing, being part of the general expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, being annulled and reflectant and see-through, so that Hashem's presence will be expressed through that word that he's saying, so that through that artifact, which is a saying of Hashem, instead of doing that, I notice the rock. So it's as if the rock is protruding. It's fussing over itself. And because its self-presence is so present, so it conceals of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. So again, refining creation, obviously what I just said, so imagining about a rock is a little bit abstract. But our personal awareness is very reflectant of this. The more we're self-involved and we're caught up with expressing ourselves, so the less our own personal reality manages to reflect HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to reflect HaKadosh Baruch Hu's divinity in the world. So therefore, a lot of the service of Hashem, or maybe the most important faculty of the service of Hashem, is where a person needs to subjugate, or again refine his impulsive tendency to fuss over himself, and to bulge, to make an issue of himself, to want to draw a lot of attention to himself. And so me drawing attention to myself is like, in the allegory, like my words drawing attention to themselves and concealing the content of what I'm saying. So it's the same thing. I'm a word. I'm being worded by Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is speaking me into existence, all of us. And what we actually are an expression of Hashem. But if we're fussing over ourselves, and instead of these words, instead of these expressions of Hashem expressing Him, they're just expressing themselves. So if I want Hashem to be revealed, I need to refine myself in a way that I don't express myself, and I'm just a chariot, that's another phrase, that Hashem can ride on. And exactly like the allegory, if I'm speaking now, so the more you can ignore my tone of voice or the language I'm using and just focus on the content, the more you can listen and hear my expression of self. But if the letters that I use are very protruding, so they they bother you to hear the content. So let's say, as an example, like we said before, I've had a very squeaky voice. So that could make you, again, sidetrack you, like occupy your attention and take your attention away from listening to my expression of self. But if my words and my letters and the voice that I use isn't preoccupying you, so you ignore it, so it becomes a vessel where my expression of self rides on it, like a chariot that I'm able to convey myself. It's the medium I'm using to convey myself to you. So right now I'm speaking. If you ignore the technical aspects of my speech and you just listen to the content, then my words are just conveying and expressing myself, who I am. But if you get caught up with the protrusion of the letters or my not so good vocabulary English or my grammatic problems, if that catches you and draws your attention, so it'll conceal or disable my ability to express myself. So you'll come out of the class and you didn't hear the content, you just got caught up with the technicalities. That's what's happening in our life. So in order for our existence to express Hashem, then we have to not protrude. And this is the concept of the tabernacle, this word that we discussed. That the ability to express something, to make something noticeable, depends on the other side of reality being a void, being like a vacuum. So the more I'm not here, again, the more I stop protruding and make fussing over myself and expressing my own personal existence, the more HaKadosh Baruch Hu's existence is vacuumed and sucked into reality and expressed through my existence. So this is what the tabernacle is. The entire concept of building a Beis Hamikdash, building a home for Hashem, is taking physical matter, like even a geographic place in reality. This should be every geographic place in reality, but the actual tabernacle, or the place of the temple that Bezrat Hashem we're hoping to build. So a temple for Hashem is a place that expresses where we manage to refine reality in such a sense that when you look at it, instead of seeing the personal egocentric protrusion of the rocks themselves, even, they reflect how they're just an expression of Hashem. So they don't protrude themselves, they intertwine, they're annulled to the speaker, to who's saying them, and they convey Hashem's expression of self. And then this physical matter becomes an artifact, which is a chariot for Hashem to reveal himself. And that's what the entire secret of the tabernacle is. And it's described in this word, the pekudei. The pekudei means that on the one hand, the existence of all of these, all the gold and silver and all of the materials that were concocted into the tabernacle, on the one hand, they're absent. And nifkanta means that they're like void. But that void creates a vacuum that sucks Hashem's presence in. So the same word for something being absent is that it's also noticeable. So my lack of protrusion, or the tabernacle's lack of protrusion, you could think that when you reach the tabernacle, you see a beautiful building. But that's not the truth. When people came to Beis Hamikdash, they didn't notice the beautiful building. And there were more beautiful buildings. But the beauty of, or the miraculous beauty of what the tabernacle was, is like the Torah says, that when you came to the Beis Hamikdash, or the tabernacle, then you managed to ignore all the artifacts and notice that there's a presence of Hashem here. So the ability to take gold and silver and materials and also architecture and art, and it was beautiful, but to do it in such a sense that the beauty doesn't protrude in of itself. It's see-through beauty, it's refined beauty. The kind of beauty that's only a medium to express who's saying it. So not a beautifully articulated artwork that draws attention to itself, but a beautifully orchestrated construction that becomes so in harmony with creation that it only reflects the creator. So it doesn't draw attention to itself. So the concept of nifkadta ki paket moshavecha is what the entire tabernacle by essence is. It's the ability to make all of creation something that's simultaneously see-through and also protruding. Because it's see-through, so Hashem protrudes through it. Now, not only in physical creation, all the more so, this is what our mentality needs to reflect. So on the one hand, there's a lot of subjugation of our own personal impulsive ego, where our first nature is very much to protrude ourselves. Once that becomes refined, so it's not that you just remain meek. There's a holy protrusion that comes through. So you just need to move aside the initial impulsive, coarse sense of self, and then what your actual reality is, which is, again, each and every one of us, like every rock and every stone, and even more so, every human being is infinitely more than a rock and a stone, a unique expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every person that's the literal simple meaning of every person being created in the image of God. Really all of creation, which is also written in many places, is created in the image of God. Just like every word I say is somehow expressing the image of who I am. So all of creation is that way. But a human being is like a whole unique expression of a certain aspect of Kodesh Baruch Hu. But in order for that to be revealed, for that to protrude, he has to first refine and put aside his initial coarse protrusion of self, which is again like coming to a class and hearing only the sounds. And then you're missing the whole point. Instead of it expressing Hashem, instead of me expressing my true content, I'm just covering up with it with my superficial coarseness. So in order for the true godly divine protrusion to come through, for me to stand tall and express HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for my pride not to be an egocentric, dominating, violent pride of self, I need to first refine that initial tendency which we're all born with, which is like the technical wording of creation, and refine that so that it reflects HaKadosh Baruch Hu protrusion. And then again, the tachlis, like the purpose of all this, is not to remain in a subjugated meekness. It's to be able to reflect a true vision or a true protrusion of Hashem's presence. Same thing with the tabernacle. Same thing with the human psyche. That on the one hand, it needs to be refined. It needs to be orchestrated in a way that it doesn't call attention to itself. But the point of that is not to remain something in the shadows. It's to be able to be a medium to reflect and draw all the attention to the speaker. Every word we say should draw attention to the content that we're conveying. And in order for it to do that, then the word has to be refined enough to not draw attention to itself. And it's the same thing about every artifact in creation, about every human soul in creation. So that's what this paradoxical meaning, uniting in the word pekudei, means. The same word for a protrusion or for a noticeability, that something draws notice to itself, the same exact word for something being see-through and negligible and not accounted for. Because the more I make my coarseness, my initial egocentric coarseness, something negligible that I can put aside, then the more the true content of my existence, of every one of our existence, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's expression of self, can protrude through, bulge through and be seen by all of creation. So Bezrat Hashem, we should all be tabernacles. We should also, Bezrat Hashem, build a tabernacle, a true tabernacle, also physical tabernacle, also in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, which is the chosen place for this, but also everywhere in the world, every home, and especially every heart, every person in the world should be a tabernacle expressing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we're all needed for this because every human being is a uniqueness, like a personality trait, like an aspect of who Hashem is. So we all have to refine ourselves and put aside the coarseness of our technicality in order for the true content of our existence, which is an expression of Hashem, to protrude and bulge through and be visible to all of creation. Bezrat Hashem. So that's today's portion of today's week. Shavua Tov.